Hello and welcome to The Deep Dive.
Mm.
Today we're embarking on a really captivating journey. We're looking into how a nation, kind of against the odds, managed to stitch its identity together.
Especially when that identity was really being tested.
Exactly. We're focusing on the Philippines, a really pivotal law, and of course a national hero whose ideas still echo today, Jose Rizal. And our insights today, well, they come primarily from a great source, the Rizal Law, the Theory of Nationalism, and the 19th Century Philippines Module 1.pdf. We've really tried to pull out the key bits for you.
Yeah, our mission, if you like, for this deep dive is to kind of unpack that fascinating interplay between, well, laws on the books, the historical context, and just the raw power of ideas in shaping a nation's identity.
It's about understanding how a nation is, imagined and then actually forged.
Precisely.
So let's start by pulling back the curtain on Republic Act number 1425.
Hmm.
Most people know it as the Rizal Law. It was enacted June 12, 1956.
The key date.
A very key date. And its core mandate was pretty straightforward, but also radical for its time. All schools, colleges, universities in the Philippines had to teach the life, works, and writings of Jose Rizal.
And especially his novels, right? The Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo, they were central.
Absolutely central. What's so interesting isn't just what it mandated, but how it did it. Using literature, specifically these really powerful novels, as a tool for nation building.
It was definitely bold.
It really was. The idea was to force a kind of critical look at society and instill a deeper sense of nationalism, especially when there was this perception that Filipino identity was maybe weakening or under threat.
And you mentioned controversy earlier. Well, the opposition to this bill before it became law was intense, really intense, particularly from the Catholic Church.
Oh, absolutely. It wasn't just political disagreement. It was a fundamental ideological clash.
A battle for the nation's soul, in a way.
You could say that. And right in the middle of it was Senator Claro M. Recto. He was the main force behind the Rizal bill.
And he paid a price for it, didn't he?
He really did. He got labeled a communist, anti-Catholic, you name it, just for pushing this.
Wow.
And get this. The Catholic schools were so against it, they actually threatened to close down entirely if the bill passed.
Seriously, that's a huge threat.
Huge. But Recto, apparently very calm about it, just shot back that if they closed, the government would nationalize the schools.
Called their bluff.
Totally. And what I find really telling is Recto's insistence on using the unexpurgated versions of Rizal's novels. No edits, no censorship.
The full, raw text.
Exactly. He had this quote, it's really powerful. He said, "The people who would eliminate the books of Rizal from the schools would blot out from our minds the memory of the national hero." This is not a fight against Recto, but a fight against Rizal.
That really frames it, doesn't it? It shows how high the stakes were perceived to be. It highlights just how contested the very idea of Filipino identity was back then.
So how did it end? Did Recto get his way completely?
Well, yes and no. The bill passed, which was the main thing. But there was a compromise. A clause was added.
Ah, okay. What did it say?
It allowed students to apply for an exemption from reading the novel specifically if they felt genuinely that it would damage their faith.
But just the reading part.
Yes, and this is crucial. They couldn't get out of taking the Rizal subject altogether. So the core idea, studying Rizal's life and ideas, that stayed. It was a concession, but the mandate basically held.
Okay, so that's the history. But fast forward to today, why is studying Rizal still, relevant? Why bother with these 19th century ideas now?
That's a great question. I think studying Rizal really helps make sense of the present. It connects us vividly to the past. His novels, for example, they act like mirrors sometimes.
How so?
Well, the societal problems, the injustices he wrote about in the 19th century Philippines, you read them today, and sometimes it's frankly shocking how similar they feel to issues we're still grappling with.
So it's like seeing patterns.
Exactly. It gives students, and really anyone, the tools to analyze their own society, to think critically. It encourages awareness, maybe pushes back against apathy, seeing those threads connecting yesterday and today.
That makes perfect sense. And it leads us nicely from the law about nationalism to the concept itself. We've talked about mandating it, but what is this thing called nationalism? It can feel a bit abstract.
It definitely can be. At its heart, nationalism is this belief system, a powerful one, that promotes the interests of a particular nation, usually with the goal of self-governance, sovereignty, being free from outside control.
Right. And the source mentions it's often tied to the political awakening of the lower classes. Like nationalist movements tend to be populist.
Often, yes, they seek to bring those groups into the political fold. And typically, nationalism draws on a few key elements, right? Our source lists 5 basic ones.
Yeah, let's see. Culture, history, language, religion, and territory. Those seem like the building blocks.
They are, but the really fascinating part is how these elements combine in our heads. It's not just about objective facts, it's about a shared story, a collective imagination.
Okay, collective imagination. How does that work?
This brings us to Benedict Anderson's concept. It's hugely influential. He called the nation an imagined community.
Imagined, like not real.
Not quite not real. Imagined in the sense that you'll never meet most of the people in your nation. You won't know them personally.
Okay, yeah.
But you still feel a connection, right? A sense of shared identity, a deep comradeship, even if there's massive inequality or difference within the nation. Anderson says it's imagined as both inherently limited and sovereign. It exists in our minds collectively.
That's a powerful idea. And Anderson also talked about uh, homogeneous empty time. What's that about?
Right, that's a bit more complex but crucial. Before modern nationalism, Anderson argues, people often saw time differently. Maybe like events happening simultaneously but separately, like God's time almost.
Okay.
Homogeneous empty time is more like clock time, calendar time. It allows us to imagine the nation as a single unit moving steadily through history. An event in Luzon and an event in Mindanao can be seen as part of the same national story, unfolding in the same measured time.
Ah, I see. So it creates a shared timeline, a sense that we're all in this together, moving forward.
Exactly. It lets people imagine millions of others they don't know living parallel lives within the same national narrative.
And how does this connect back to Rizal?
Well, Anderson himself points directly to Rizal's Noli Me Tangere as a prime example of conjuring this imagined community.
Really? How did the novel do that?
Think about reading it. You, the reader, become familiar with this whole cast of characters, their lives, their connections across different places within the Philippines. You even feel a connection to Rizal, the author. It creates a sense of shared space and shared time.
Like you're seeing the whole society laid out.
Precisely. Anderson said the novel operates in that empty time, making the reader almost omniscient, observing this delimited society unfold. It helps imagine the Philippines as a coherent whole, which was revolutionary then.
Okay, this is fascinating.
Yeah.
Let's shift focus now. Let's actually go back to that 19th century world, Rizal's world. What was happening then?
It was a period of massive change. Spain's empire was fading, its grip loosening, though still powerful and oppressive. And crucially, within the Philippines, the native populations were starting to wake up politically.
A national consciousness was forming.
Slowly, yes, driven largely by frustration, by abuses, and by new ideas filtering in.
And our source highlights something really fundamental about Rizal himself, doesn't it? About a word.
Yes, absolutely key. Jose Rizal was apparently the first person to consistently use the word Filipino to mean everyone born in the archipelago.
Not just people with Spanish blood.
Exactly. Before Rizal, under Spain, the term Filipino usually meant Spaniards born in the Philippines. The Insulares, sometimes also mestizos, the native Malay population, they were called indios, often derogatorily.
So Rizal reclaimed the word.
He redefined it. He argued that everyone living there, regardless of ancestry, shared this land and should share this identity, Filipino. It was a radical act of unification, creating one people out of these divided groups.
That's a huge conceptual leap. And looking at that century, there were specific events, specific forces that really pushed this new nationalism forward, weren't there?
Definitely. It wasn't just one thing. You had major economic shifts. For starters, the Industrial Revolution wasn't just happening in Europe.
How did it affect the Philippines?
It boosted international trade. Things like sugar, tobacco, abaca. This created more wealth, especially for some Filipino families, often those with Spanish connections or mestizo backgrounds.
So new money, maybe new influence.
And new connections to the outside world, new ideas. It started to subtly challenge the old colonial power structure.
Then there was the issue of the friars. The source calls it phreolocracy.
Yes, the immense power and often abusive power held by the religious orders. Rizal and others in the propaganda movement relentlessly exposed this.
Like in his novels?
Exactly, pointing out the abuses, the hypocrisy. This gave people a common grievance, a clear target for their frustrations. It helped define who the enemies of the Filipino people were perceived to be.
And you mentioned outside ideas. How do they get in?
A huge factor was the opening of the Suez Canal in 1869.
Right, the shortcut between Europe and Asia.
It drastically cut travel time. Suddenly, it was much easier and faster for ships to bring not just goods, but books, newspapers, magazines from Europe and America, liberal ideas, Enlightenment thought, revolutionary concepts.
So ideas traveled faster too.
Much faster. This flow of information had a profound impact on educated Filipinos like Rizal. It fueled his political awakening, shaped his nationalist thinking.
And the actual governance by Spain wasn't exactly stable either, was it? There were shifts in leadership.
Stark shifts, yes. Look at the contrast between Governor General Carlos Ma de la Torre.
He was the liberal one.
Relatively, yes. From 1869 to 71, he relaxed censorship, talked about secularizing education, even offered amnesty to some rebels. There was a sense of opening up.
But then,
Then came Governor General Rafael Izquierdo from 1871 to 73. Complete opposite. Iron fist, cracked down hard, reversed reforms, suppressed Filipino aspirations.
that must have been jarring.
Incredibly, that kind of whiplash really highlighted the arbitrary nature of colonial rule. It showed Filipinos they couldn't rely on Spanish goodwill. It pushed them further towards seeking their own path.
And all this leads up to a really pivotal year, 1872. Two major events happened then, right?
Yes, 1872 was absolutely critical. First, you had the Cavite Mutiny in January.
What was that?
It was an uprising, mainly by Filipino soldiers and workers at the Cavite arsenal. Apparently, overpay and forced labor policies imposed by Izquierdo. It was quickly, brutally suppressed.
What were the consequences?
Izquierdo used it as a pretext to clamp down even harder. Filipino soldiers were disarmed, many executed or exiled. It spread fear, but also resentment.
And the second event, that one seems even more significant in the long run.
Definitely. Just weeks after the mutiny, on February 17, 1872, came the execution of John Morzae.
The three priests, Gomez, Burgos, and Zamora.
Mariano Gomez, Jose Burgos, and Jacinto Zamora. Three Filipino secular priests who had been advocating for the rights of Filipino clergy. They were implicated in the Cavite Mutiny, likely falsely.
And executed.
Executed publicly by garrote. A particularly brutal method. It was meant to intimidate, to crush dissent.
But backfired.
Massively. Instead of fear, it created martyrs. Gomburza became symbols of Spanish injustice. Their executions sent shockwaves across the islands. It's often cited as the event that truly awakened Rizal's nationalism and that of many others. It unified Filipinos in shared grief and outrage.
So these aren't just separate historical facts.
Not at all. You have to see them woven together. The economic changes, the friar abuses, the influx of ideas, the political instability, the failed mutiny, and then the shocking execution.
They all fed into each other.
Exactly. They collectively created the conditions, the consciousness, for a real widespread Filipino nationalism to take root. They were the sparks that lit the fire, laying the groundwork for everything that came after.
Wow, what an incredible, complex story we've unpacked today. We went from that fierce legislative fight over the Rizal Law.
And the very idea of how you even imagine a nation, that imagined community.
And then right into the thick of the 19th century, seeing how those specific events, those struggles, really forged the Filipino identity we recognize today.
It really shows how nations aren't just drawn on maps. They're built through laws, yes, but also through shared ideas, shared struggles, shared memories. Understanding Rizal's time, the challenges, the sacrifices, it gives so much insight into national identity today.
It really does.
Yeah.
And it reminds us that these things are constantly evolving.
Absolutely. Nations aren't finished products. They're always being imagined and reimagined.
So perhaps a final thought for you, our listener, to take away and think about.
Yeah.
How do these ideas, the imagined community, the role of historical struggle, like in Rizal's era, how do they resonate today?
Yeah, think about how new communities, maybe online communities or new identities are formed in our super connected world. Are there parallels?
What lessons from this deep dive into Filipino history might apply to understanding social movements, political changes, or even identity formation happening right now, maybe even in your own life or community? Something to mull over.